I generously poured silver rum into the Boston shaker along with simple syrup and fresh lime juice. Closing the shaker, I began to jostle it in a methodic motion. I couldn't help but sync the shaking of the metal container to the beat of the music resounding throughout the club. 3 college-aged girls waited across the counter. One of them smiled at me and leaned in. "Can you do any tricks for us?" she asked, a hint of vodka on her breath. I feigned confusion. "What kind of tricks?" "You know," she said. "Like those tricks you see on the internet all the time. Like tossing drinks around and stuff." Her finger twirled thick locks of her golden hair as she stared at me. I smiled. "Oh," I began. "Do you mean like this?" I tossed the shaker behind my head and caught it on the other side. "Is that it?" she asked playfully. I smiled wider and tossed the shaker up into the air. It landed on my shoulder and then rolled down the length of my upper arm. When it reached my elbow, I jerked and it shot back into the air. Switching hands, I let the silver container roll down the back of my right arm and come to a controlled stop in the crease of my elbow. The girl was now visibly impressed. I was about to continue my routine when I heard a patronizingly slow clap. A man who had been sitting at the bar for a few hours was staring at me. He stood up and staggered over to the girl.
"If you're impressed that easy," he slurred, "then you'll love a guy like me."
The girl let out a nervous laugh and moved away slightly. The man looked back at me. He was still wearing his work clothes. His top button was undone and his tie was loose around the neck. Only one side of his shirt was tucked into his pants. He had been there before my shift, and clearly Dimitri, the bartender on shift before me, had given him far more drinks than the club's policy allowed.
"That's shit,"
he said, staring at me.
"Not impressive. Not worth her time."
I finished pouring the daiquiris for the 3 girls and handed them their glasses so that they could leave quickly. The girl who had been flirting with me mouthed "spasibo," which is thank you in Russian, and she hurried off to some tables near the edge of the dance floor. The drunken man turned to follow and called out,
"Where are you going, beautiful?"
I grabbed him by the wrist. "She doesn't want to talk with you," I said, "so leave her alone." He stared at me, unmoving. By all accounts, he was an average-looking 30-something-year-old, albeit a 30-something-year-old who was plastered. But when I locked eyes with him, there was something off. The way he stared was unsettling. His pupils almost seemed to writhe, like there was a darkness stirring underneath. I felt that beneath this very average man, there was something sinister lurking. He blinked.
"Fine,"
he said, pulling his wrist away.
"Be useful and get me a drink."
"No," I said. "You're cut off. If you want to sit quietly at the bar, you can, but I'm not serving you anything else tonight." He stared at me again. His disheveled hair stood up on either side of his head, unnervingly similar to a devil's horns.
"Cut off,"
the man repeated. "Yes," I said.
"Cut off,"
he muttered again.
"Cut off,"
he repeated a 3rd time. Then he smiled, as if he had just realized something. His eyes were looking at me but not quite fixed on me. I grew increasingly uncomfortable. He laughed and immediately headed for the exit door, pausing only to turn and smile at me one last time. Then he left, and I was glad to have him gone. I returned to my work and poured drinks for those who had been waiting, but none of them seemed as disturbed by what had just happened as I was. They only appeared annoyed at having to wait longer. The rest of the night continued like any other night. There was the occasional rowdy patron, overly patriotic Russians prepared to die for the motherland. But they always ended up being all talk and would leave it at the first appearance of a threatening bouncer. The girl I had been talking to left a few hours before closing. She left without her friends. As she passed me, she offered another thank you, and then she was gone. By the end of the night, my mind had settled. The tedious task of polishing glasses after closing was always effective in clearing my head. Igor, the manager of the club, told me I could head home and that he would lock up. I stepped out into the brisk air and headed for my car. The night was dark. Clouds blocked all light from the stars. I became painfully aware of my aloneness and hurried into my vehicle, making sure to lock the doors behind me. As I drove home, a car pulled out of one of the side alleys and carried on behind me. Its high beams were on, and I felt a headache creeping into my skull as the light blared into my eyes. I turned left, so did the car behind me. That was no cause for worry, I reassured myself. Whoever was driving was just heading in the same direction. But every turn I made on my way to my apartment, the car behind me made as well. Despite the frigid temperature inside my car, I began to sweat. No one is following me, I thought to myself. It's not him. He was just some drunk asshole. My heartbeat drummed in my ears, increasing the pressure in my hand. I made an abrupt right turn, a turn I didn't need to take. The car sped past me. I came to a stop in the middle of the road and sighed with relief. It was all in my head. Still, I waited a moment to see if the car would turn back around to find me. It didn't. When I reached my apartment complex, I hurried up the steps to the second floor and locked my room door behind me. The television had been left on, and I welcomed the monotonous sound of the local news station. It made me feel less alone. I grabbed a bottle of Otrakovo from the fridge and sat on the couch. The alcohol did its work, and I began to relax. There was a knock on my window. I froze, not wanting to turn, not wanting to let bother me whatever had knocked on my reality. But it knocked again. I turned, and every stupid fear I had felt throughout that night became real. There he was, on the fire escape. He was still wearing the loose tie. He still had only one side of his collared shirt tucked in, but now he was holding something. It was long. A baseball bat? Had he come to beat me to death? Fear fell on me when I remembered I had forgotten to lock the window. The man lifted it open and tossed the object inside. "Cut off!" he yelled and laughed wildly. The object made a sickening thud and rolled awkwardly onto my carpet. My mouth was agape. It was a severed arm. It looked like it had belonged to a woman. My mind immediately went to the girl at the club. She had left alone. Blood spattered my carpet, and I continued to stare at the nightmarish length of flesh. My brain could barely comprehend that this thing could have once been attached to a human. I didn't want to believe it. I heard a loud thud and looked up. The window was closed, and the man was gone. With shaking hands, I pulled my phone from my pocket to call the police, but paused when I heard the blare of sirens. Writhing red and blue lights flooded the night outside my apartment. Had they seen the man? Were they going to arrest him already? Even if they were here for unrelated reasons, I had to go get them now. I flung my door open and found that 2 officers were already in the hall. "Slava Bogu," I muttered in relief. "Hands up!" an officer yelled, his gun drawn. "What?" "I said hands up now!" I lifted my hands into the air. He was staring behind me. I realized he had drawn his gun when he saw the arm on my floor. "Please," I said. "There was a man here. He—" "Shut up," the other officer said. "We got a tip that a girl had been kidnapped. A girl who was last seen at the club you work at." My heart dropped into my stomach. That man had called the police. He was trying to frame me. "Please," I repeated. "He hurt her, maybe even killed her. He's just outside." "Listen," the officer said. "When you have a girl's arm on your living room floor, that makes you the prime suspect. So shut up and open your closet." "My closet?" "The tip said the girl was stuffed into a closet. They saw from the alley." "Fine," I thought. "When they see my closet is empty, then they'll have to listen to me." They motioned me into my bedroom with their guns. I grabbed the handle of my closet and pulled. What we all saw inside lacerated my sanity. I couldn't move. Inside the closet was a multitude of body parts, all hooked onto clothing hangers and hung among my regular outfits. A pair of bloodied feet pierced on the same hook, a motionless heart on another, hunks of meat I couldn't recognize on others. On the floor of my closet were 2 legs and another arm. The hooked body parts were dripping blood like rain. The crown of horror sat atop my dresser, where I kept my folded shirts. It was her head. It was the girl's head. The sweet girl. The innocent girl. I felt my body hit the floor as an officer tackled me, my face now touching one of the bloody legs. My nose pressed into the meaty flesh where a foot should have been. Metal clamped down on my wrists, and I was lifted to my feet. How? I thought. How did he know where I live? How did he put all this in here? As they dragged me outside down the hall, I wanted to tell them everything that had happened. I wanted to tell them that this was a misunderstanding, but I couldn't speak. Fear silenced me. They were saying something to me, but I couldn't hear them. I felt sick as they shoved me into the back of their patrol car. I'm innocent, I thought. There has to be proof somewhere. I won't be shipped off to Siberia for something I didn't do. As the patrol car pulled away from the apartments, I saw a figure, coated in red and blue light, standing across the street. The patches of blood on his tie and collared shirt looked like pits of pure darkness. I wanted to scream at the officers to look, but I still couldn't speak. The man smiled at me. He looked genuinely happy. He lifted a hand and waved, as if he were saying goodbye to an old friend. Then he turned and disappeared into the cold night. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe and smash that like button to get notified every time I upload a new video. You can also check out some more of my animated horror stories right here.